Jessica. Hi, it's a great pleasure to be here, so thank you for that introduction. This morning we changed our name actually. Capgemini is still in the name. We used to be Capgemini Consulting. We're now Capgemini Invent. So you're probably hearing that here first. But it indicates where we're moving as a company. We are now 6,000 people, innovation through to delivery. So it was incredibly interesting for me listening to Karen to how we may work more with WPP and others as we deliver innovation into the market that we work in. And FS is where I work. I'm hoping this does work. It's interesting, when I started working in financial services, which was back in the 80s, I was a trader. I wouldn't have considered banking to be a creative industry. And I did do two things at the same time. I did work in banking and I did follow my creative instincts. But increasingly it's come together. And over the last 5 years for me, the FS industry, financial services industry, has now become one of the most disrupted and one of the most creative environments to work in, which is great for us. And really interesting for the client base we have. I've worked with everyone from the large global banks, I still do, I work with HSBC and Lloyds and Barclays, through to the fintech. And if you've not come across fintech as a term, I'd be very surprised. It's one of the most buzzed words in the last 2 years, and it's about financial technology. But as I mentioned here, most of my work is based in design thinking. So we're constantly thinking about what the consumer or the customer of the financial services is going to need. When I go back 10 years, when I started working with customer experience, I'd come out of some work with Apple. I'd worked with Steve Jobs to launch the iMac back in the middle of the 90s. And banks didn't have a customer experience department. They just didn't even conceptualize the need for a customer experience department. So I started building them about 10 years ago. And now it's pretty standard stuff. You'd expect to see a CX department. It's become more sophisticated and more reliant upon data, which Karen mentioned. But increasingly, we're now focused on insights and talking to the customer base. So I wanted to just show you a quick provocation video, if that's okay, just to show you where we think financial services is actually going to be. And this is based on the fact that increasingly when I speak to banks, they don't actually feel they're going to be banks in the future. But let me give you a sense of that.
So, what have I got on today?
Your first meeting is with Martin. He was CIO at a bank before he set up his own health tech company. He's just moved the meeting to your offices and there's traffic by the school. Shall I get a car here earlier?
Yeah, sounds good.
This evening, you are out with the family for Amanda's birthday.
Did you order the gift I picked out?
Yes, it's wrapped and is still on track to be delivered to your office before lunch.
Great, thanks. Tammy, what was a bank?
A bank was a place where you borrowed or kept your money. It was complicated.
What, people had to manage their money themselves?
So, what happened to all the banks?
I am a bank,
You're an AI, my personal assistant.
and to be the best I can, I've learnt all about you. Your health and wealth, work and social life.
So, you're really the bank of me?
Yes, I like that. While we are talking, you have been very busy on the Simmons project. There is a gap in your diary, so I've put in some time to see your parents. You last saw them 6 months ago. Flights are held on your points, so this won't upset your saving goals.
Can you get Claude so I can talk to him about that new watch concept I saw in GQ?
Yes, calling now. While we wait, you're not travelling this week, and the fridge is looking a bit empty. Shall I fill your grocery cart with your usual items?
Sure.
Thanks.
We're thinking about getting a dog.
Okay. There are a few things to think about. Insurance, food, vet bills.
Right, yeah.
Regular walks with a dog may make you eligible for a discount on your life insurance policy and health insurance. That should easily cover the extra costs. One more thing, what will you call it? I like the name Jess.
So do I.
So it's interesting. Our teams build these systems now. This is not some kind of future vision. Our teams run the social listening platforms for Unilever globally. We run the loyalty program for IKEA, both quite significant data creators. And we see this now being a very, very key indicator of where we're going in the future. The quantified self is something we're working on very heavily. My team, if you like, my team, which is a centre of excellence, is called FinX. It used to be called digital banking. Both of the terms I don't really like to use too much anymore. Financial experience is where we're trying to build now. And it's really differentiating for us in the market, but also it's a really interesting conversation with consumers and with our companies that we're working with. We're trying to match the ambition of those companies which are seeing disruption all over the place. And I'm going to show you just a few examples of disruption later that we're involved in, because I think it's quite interesting to see the reality of what we're delivering currently in the street. But just first, I just wanted to show you really our view on things and how they're changing. So this is not going to be any surprise to you. It was a surprise to banking. When I first started using these terms, it was, I think, as Richard mentioned, the kind of Uber platform, the change in platform businessing. We moved from this old world where banks were the central authority. You went to the bank and you were told what you could borrow. It was very managed, it was very top down. Obviously, I think we mentioned trust as one issue. Banks were trusted as arbiters of those decisions. Then we had about, well, almost exactly 10 years ago, we had the big financial crisis, as you all know. I still remember waking up to the news that Lehman Brothers had crashed. And then there was this massive disruption. And interestingly, I think yesterday they mentioned in the news, we're all in the 30 to 40-year-old bracket, about £800 a year worse off still from then. So a massive impact. And you would imagine banks are now the least trusted of all, perhaps. But I'll come to that in a second. Where we're moving to is this collective power, the new world, the platform, as I've mentioned. It's a much more authentic world. We've talked in the PR side around the messaging out to customers. It has to be real. And banks previously had a real difficulty with this particular transition. I'm glad to say we're seeing a difference in a tone of voice from banking. And again, I'm going to show some examples of that. But for me, the interesting flick is the customer is still trusting of the old institutional banks. I did some work about 2 years ago, a big data collection piece of work to test what customers trusted. Did they trust Google? Did they trust Facebook? Did they trust NatWest? Did they trust HSBC, SocGen, whatever? And actually, interestingly, for banking, there's still a great trust in the older institutions, the incumbent banks. So this currency is still there. So it's really important for the large incumbent banks to use that currency, because it's going to be really important. Because to flick into the new world and to have a play against Google Pay or Apple Pay or whoever it might be, Alibaba, Alipay, there's going to have to be a differentiator for those banks, because they're not going to win purely on a platform play alone. And the other problem for the banks, of course, is the business of banking is not something that Google, Apple, or Facebook are looking to engage in on a full stack basis. In other words, they don't want to offer deposit accounts. Why would they? But they are interested in offering the payment solution. And they are interested in offering a loan. And interestingly, if you look into the global loans business, unsecured loans, 75% of all unsecured lending comes out of BAT, the Far East big tech players. Incredible figures. And this has happened in the last 2 years. So pretty big changes for banking. When we look at banking, it has to be customer-centric. So all of the work we're doing to re-engineer, and that's what we do, re-engineer all of the legacy of banking to make it customer-centric. I am a consultant yesterday, now an inventor today, so I do have these kind of slides which try to describe the changes in operating model. And I've tried to simplify it for you guys because I know there's a difference in understanding in banking. But this is trying to describe really simply what's happening in the financial services world. You've got the standard banks. This is in the bottom quadrant here. And they're moving towards digital. Most of them have made that move. And now there's this thing called open banking in the world. Open banking means the opening of all data through APIs. Now, of course, the platforms love this idea because, of course, they can utilize the data and they can step in to where the banks previously had relationships and take the customers away from them, take them out of the value chain. So we see the big tech moving from orchestrators into financial services. Simple as that, really. But it's a great challenge for banking. Banking themselves, they're opening up their APIs, but there's still a long way to go. There's a lot of use cases of great work we're doing in the world where banks are generally stepping through and trying to create ecosystems. And the work that I do with banks like HSBC are to work with their internal organisation to understand how they can work better with the fintech world, how they can create an ecosystem and orchestrate it for the value of the customers. So that's what we're doing. We're stepping through that. But if you look at the world of banking, the world of financial services, there are three big blocks, really simply speaking. You've got the traditional banks working here, and you can see where they're activating on that segment. You've got the new banks, and we work with a number of those. Really exciting, and I'm sure you've all come across some of the new banks like Monzo and Starling. I'll be talking a little bit about them in a second. But they're really exciting in terms of customer experience. And then coming on the horizon, we think the biggest trend will be the fact that big tech starts to take out the value chain. And yesterday, Google announced in India that it's partnering with 4 of the major Indian banks, and they will look to $1 trillion worth of business over the next 2 years. Absolutely insane figures, but this is the change that we're seeing ahead. Now, I'm just going to give you 2 or 3 examples, as I haven't got a lot of time. I haven't got a clock here, so I'm going to rely on Jess to keep me honest. Some of the examples of work we do. Bank of Ireland I started working with 3 or 4 years ago. We've replaced their core banking system. The big problem for banks is not really coming to customer experience now. They understand they need to give a different offer. What they have a problem with, they've got these legacy systems and a lot of accommodation. They've got a lot of property. So they come to us to look at their legacy systems and to re-engineer their models so they can become a new digital player. Now, with Bank of Ireland, they had a core system that was not fit for purpose, which we've now replaced. The challenge for most of these banks, though, is not just that. It's the data that they have. So the data they have is usually quite dirty. And Bank of Ireland won't mind me saying that because it's pretty well known that most banks, most old banks, have got pretty dirty data. And what do I mean by dirty data? Just data that's really difficult to use. It's not accurate, it's old, it has errors within it, and we can't migrate it into a new system when it's completely wrong. It wouldn't give us any value. So I think when Richard was talking about real value, we need to understand and have the insights from real data. So these banks need us to clean their data. So we're actively working with a number of large banks to clean up data. So that's the kind of work we do there. The reason we do it is because they want to keep their relationships. There are really important relationships these banks have, and it's the same with the incumbents in the UK. So we call this relationship banking. They want to keep their brand, they want to improve it, they want to digitize it, and then they want to work with customers in a different way. So that's relationship banking. If you move on to someone like Starling, a new entrant in the market, Starling's been around for 3 or 4 years now. Interesting enough, the link to Ireland, its CEO is an ex-AIB, which is a large Irish bank. She's the CEO of Starling. Brilliant interface. I don't know whether any of you have Starling accounts, but really beautiful, elegant user interface. Really useful functionality. But the key differentiator is this thing we call marketplace banking. So they don't offer all the services. They are a platform. And they do business deals, they do commercial deals with providers of a range of other services. Wealth management, insurance, all of those kind of other services you can plug into through the application and then get access to those services. My favourite one actually is Wealthify. I was a judge at a CX competition last year, and I gave Wealthify the top prize. Wealthify, if you haven't come across them, are a little app. They're great. They're now a bigger insurance company, but they provide services through Starling as well. But the idea of it is wealth management used to be in the hands of the few. You'd have to have 500,000 plus to get a wealth management service, which is out of our reach, right? They're offering it to someone with £100 a month. So it's a really simple, easy to interface system, trying to give value to a larger market. And I think for me that's brilliant. That's human creativity. It's trying to offer the services that some get to the majority of us, which I think is very valuable. So Starling, I think, is a great example. Monzo is my other favourite and has been for some years. I've known them for a long time. I knew them when they had about 12 staff originally. But again, they have a great curated ecosystem, is what we call this. So again, it's a platform. They offer certain services, and then they curate a large ecosystem of partners and offer it to their client base. So a wonderful, for me, a wonderful bank offering an entirely new experience for customers. And the thing about both Starling and Monzo, for me, is the tone of voice they have with all of us. They open themselves up to transparency, first of all. Monzo's brilliant. Monzo, I don't know whether you're aware of how we do things in the computing world, the tech world. We often use agility as a term, but Agile has forms like a backlog where you ask your customers what they really need, what features they really need, and then you start to publish them. You start to work on them. Monzo published openly their backlog, and they said to their customers, look, these are what we're thinking of building, guys. What's important to you? Absolutely transparent. I mean, imagine any bank doing that 5-10 years ago. It would have been unthought, well, you just wouldn't have thought of it. But the thing for Monzo is they recognize that they're not making money out of their product line, which is what the traditional banks used to do. They're making money out of the partnerships and the data they're creating. And that is, in a sense, the creativity around this. They're looking at what humans need, what our customers need, and then delivering that in a really elegant way. And it's very sophisticated, but it's growing rapidly. And of course, for us, the tone of voice makes all the difference. And of course, most incumbent banks are trying to replicate some of that authentic human creativity in the way they do business with their customers. So it's a really interesting world. The last thing I want to show you, really, it's an example of where real change is happening in the world. We were engaged by a company called Orange. You'll all know Orange, the telco provider, I'm sure. I worked with Hans Snook when I was more in your business in terms of the marketing side. Again, in the 90s, I'd done the iMac, and then Orange launched in the UK, Orange Telecoms. And I think, I don't know whether you all remember, they had this amazing campaign where it really teased everyone with this Orange identity. Well, Orange has changed in the UK, but in Europe, it's still very strong as a telecoms brand, you may know. So we were invited to go and speak to the French Orange brand. And I went to Paris and I met these guys around 2.5 years ago. Really interesting to have a chat with them about what they wanted to do. They said to me, look, we want to be a bank. We think we can offer financial services through our store network. And I said, that's great. And they said to me, and actually we don't need to make any money out of it either. In fact, we can run it at a loss. Because actually what we need to do is get people more sticky in terms of the use of their contract telephones. That's the end game. Fascinating. So as a banker, I'm thinking, crikey, so these guys are going to come in, they're going to invest in a new bank purely to become a more sticky brand and give more value to their customers in telco. That starts to have a whole different discussion on all brands, all of you in here, because suddenly there are new opportunities, let alone the thought of cryptocurrencies and the other blockchain devices we might be able to use, just in terms of the relationship with the customer and what value you provide. So we had the conversation, and they hired me and my group, my global team, to deliver this new bank. We advised them to buy an old bank in France, which they did. It was an old insurance company with a banking license. And they said to me, right, we need to have this up and running in 18 months, guys. 18 months to build a bank from scratch has never been done before. And then they said, yeah, we'd also like it to be an open bank. Never been done before in Europe. Open APIs. Okay, starting to be a bit shaky on that proposition. The last thing is we want it to be fully functional. We don't want an MVP. If you don't know what MVP is, a minimum viable product. We want it to be a full-fat, minimum lovable product, so the customer will get everything they need. So we took on the challenge and we built it in 15 months. We launched it. It's been very successful. I just wanted to show you a 1.5-minute video just to give you a flavour of what we did, if that's okay. Oh, sorry. It didn't play itself. You might have to press a play on there. There we go.
Attends mec, la banque maintenant, ça n'a plus rien à voir.
Hi, merci, Mark.
I'm going to wait because I think it comes back. It's a bit of a sales thing, so apologies. I didn't mean to. I'm not a salesperson, but I think it stops there. I knew that it was going to come. It's yeah, we did that internally. We didn't have an agency do that, so apologies. The timing wasn't great. But anyway, I'm being told to wrap up, so I'm going to. But the interesting thing about that is the history, the disruption now is becoming so quick. That it mentions there, for today, yesterday's bank is nothing to do with today. It is changing so rapidly. We're all enjoying it. Most of us use fintech quite regularly. If you don't, please go and look into it. Revolut, TransferWise. I won't go through all of the possible brands that I work with, but they're all wonderful to investigate because if you travel around the world, you will save a great deal of money by using some of those services. But for me, it's about the experience you'll have using them. That's the critical part. So I'm aware of time. I'm going to stop there, unless there are any burning questions, but I think we're probably a bit pushed for time. Hopefully, I will do it at lunch. Yeah, I will do. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, guys. Thank you.